The sound of the heavy oak door closing behind me was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a final, thunderous note that echoed not just in the grand foyer of my son's estate, but in the hollowed-out cavern of my chest. I stood on the wrong side of it, a suitcase containing the shards of my life at my feet, the California sun feeling obscenely cheerful on my face. Khloe's words still hung in the air, venomous and precise. "The will is clear, Robert. Everything is mine. David would have wanted me to move on, not be burdened by the past. You have until sundown to be gone, burdened by the past." I was the past. A 72-year-old history professor, recently widowed, now effectively orphaned by my own son's death. The irony was a historian's nightmare. David, my brilliant boy, the tech prodigy who built a $55 million empire from a dorm room idea, was gone. A sudden aneurysm. And his wife, the woman he'd married after a whirlwind romance I'd always quietly questioned, had wasted no time. Before the dirt had settled on his grave, she had evicted me from the guest wing I'd called home for the last 5 years, since my wife's passing had left me adrift. The motel room was a study in bleakness. Thin walls transmitted the sounds of arguing neighbors and blaring televisions. The floral bedspread was stiff with chemical cleaning agents, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying animal. It was a universe away from the curated luxury of David's home. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest, and finally allowed the tears to come. They weren't just for David, but for the humiliation, the profound sense of betrayal. Had my son, in his final days, truly seen me as a burden? Had the meticulous, loving boy I'd raised been so blinded by Khloe's charms that he'd left me utterly destitute? For 2 days I wallowed. I grieved. I let the despair wash over me. But I am, by trade and by nature, an analyst, a deconstructor of narratives. And as the initial shock subsided, the historian in me began to poke holes in Khloe's story. David was not a careless man. In business, he was a grandmaster, thinking 10 moves ahead. He built contingencies for his contingencies. He vetted partners with the intensity of a forensic accountant. It was an absolute, glaring impossibility that a man of his intellect and character would be so naive in the one arena that mattered most: his family. He knew Khloe's nature. He had to. He'd seen her casual cruelty, her obsession with status. It didn't add up. A will that left everything to her with no protections for me? It was a narrative that felt false. A hypothesis began to form in my mind, a scholar's desperate, hopeful theory. What if the will Khloe had so triumphantly brandished was not the final document? What if it was a test? A provocation? With a trembling hand, I found the number for Mr. Davies. Arthur Davies had been more than David's lawyer. He was his oldest friend, a fellow chess enthusiast who had been at our dinner table for 30 years. I'd been too grief-stricken to question his role in reading the will that had disinherited me. Now I had to. "Arthur? It's Robert." My voice was rough with disuse. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Robert, I've been waiting for your call." My heart hammered against my ribs. Waiting. "David made me promise," Arthur said, his voice low and serious. He said, "Don't intervene, Arthur. Not unless he calls you. He's a historian. He needs to piece it together himself." He knew, Robert. He knew exactly what Khloe would do. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. The flimsy motel room seemed to fall away. I was back in the game. The will she has. It's not the real one, is it? It's the first part of a 2-act play, Arthur confirmed. A legally binding character test. She inherits the entire estate, but she has a 30-day fiduciary duty to protect the welfare and legacy of the Peterson family, which explicitly includes you. By ejecting you from the home, she has irrevocably breached that duty. She failed, spectacularly. He explained the rest. The secret codicil locked in his safe. The true final will, which nullified the first. The $55 million estate would not go to Khloe. Instead, it would be placed into an irrevocable Peterson Legacy Trust, with me as the sole trustee. The trust's primary mission was to fund a foundation for underprivileged tech students, a cause David had always passionately believed in. For Khloe, David had designed a punishment of exquisite, tailored irony. She would receive a modest, middle-class stipend, contingent on her maintaining verifiable full-time employment. She was permitted to live, rent-free, in the 800-square-foot guest cottage on the property. A far cry from the 10,000-square-foot main house, she was to be a spectator to the legacy she craved. Forced into a life of ordinary work, which for a woman of her vanity and idleness, was a fate far worse than mere poverty. The plan was executed with the cold precision David would have admired. Arthur, using his legal authority as the executor of the true will, immediately filed injunctions and froze every asset. Khloe's credit cards were declined. Her bank accounts were locked. She was a queen of a paper kingdom, her throne suddenly made of quicksand. I, meanwhile, disappeared. I checked out of the motel and into a quiet, comfortable hotel under an assumed name, paid for by a retainer from the soon-to-be-activated trust. We gave Khloe enough rope to hang herself with, and she did, with gusto. Unaware that the walls were closing in, she continued her victory lap. I received reports from a private investigator Arthur had hired. She hosted a lavish reclamation party at the estate, boasting to her new hangers-on about her plans to modernize the place, to tear down David's beloved library to build a champagne bar. She ordered a fleet of new luxury cars. She was spending money that was no longer hers, her arrogance a blinding shield against the reality she had created. The crash, when it came, was swift and brutal. The cars were repossessed from the driveway. The contractors she'd hired for the renovations were served with cease and desist orders at the gate. Her so-called friends evaporated. The scale of her miscalculation dawned on her in a series of panicked, furious phone calls to Arthur's office, which he documented with relish. Finally, a meeting was called. A panicked, disheveled Khloe arrived at Arthur's office expecting to bully and threaten him into releasing her money. She swept into the conference room, her face a mask of entitled fury. "What is the meaning of this, Arthur? You will unfreeze my accounts immediately, or I'll—" She stopped dead. Her eyes landed on me, sitting calmly at the table next to Arthur. The color drained from her face. I looked well-rested, wearing a suit I hadn't been able to afford a week ago. The transformation from broken old man to composed authority was a weapon in itself. "You," she whispered. "Hello, Khloe," I said. "Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss." Arthur didn't give her a chance to speak. He read the true will aloud, his voice steady and clear. With every word, Khloe seemed to shrink. When he reached the part about the stipend and the guest cottage, detailing her life of mandated mediocrity, her face became a terrifying palette of purple and white. The reality of her sentence, not poverty but obscurity and drudgery, was a psychological bullet she could not withstand. She made a small guttural sound, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slid from her chair in a dead faint. 6 months later, I sit in an office at the newly established David Peterson Tech Scholars Foundation. The walls are lined not with my historical texts, but with blueprints and schematics from bright young minds. The silence is not the silence of a lonely motel room, but the productive quiet of a place where futures are being built. I am no longer a ghost. I am a custodian, a trustee. I learned that Khloe, after a prolonged legal battle she could not win, finally accepted her fate. She works as a receptionist at a dermatology clinic. She lives in the cottage, a bitter, shriveled monument to her own greed, watching the main house become a beacon of the legacy she tried to steal. Arthur forwarded me an email from her once, a rambling, spite-filled message pleading for a larger allowance. I deleted it without responding. There was no anger left in me, only a quiet sense of completion. David's final lesson was his greatest. He taught me that true justice is not a dramatic, vengeful spectacle. It is a quiet, well-laid plan that allows a villain to defeat themselves. It is the restoration of order, not through chaos, but through intellect and foresight. In securing his legacy, he gave me back my own. The historian had not just studied history. He had, with his son's help, rewritten his own. And the final chapter was one of purpose, peace, and a love that had proven smarter than death itself. Love that had proven smarter than death itself.